I'm not going to fight you too hard on this one. I do like the themes in this movie. I do like how they bring back stuff from previous movies in a way that's interesting and kind of plays with the characters. But at the same time, I'm like, it's the same feeling I get why it's probably also the same reason I feel the same way as I do about films like Man with the Golden Gun or Live and Let Die. They don't quite feel like Bond films. They feel like Bond and other movies rather than it being a Bond, straight up Bond movie. Charlie, I know you said earlier that you were like, well, it's Bond's still an assassin and everything. And like I said, I don't completely hate this movie. It just, I feel like I'm watching a completely different franchise when I watch this one movie. And you can definitely tell that they're trying to emulate what was popular at the time, being these revenge, heavy action films that are overly violent. And I don't think, and as I'm thinking about it, about the future films, there's only a few scenes in the future movies that I'm like, yeah, that's almost the same level of violence, specifically how much blood they show. But those films, there's some that I think are much better than this movie, and I don't think they have to do as much with the violence. So if you're talking about the Barbara Broccoli thing, it's like, I kind of get what Barbara's saying, but at the same time, I'm like, it doesn't necessarily completely hurt the movie. It's just something that definitely jumps out to me is that this film doesn't feel like a Bond movie. It feels like a good movie that's a really great revenge movie of the 80s. Just not something I would be like, yeah, it's a Bond movie. It feels like a very much of the times film that was trying to chase a trend, kind of succeeds in many ways, but it doesn't feel, it really kind of misses the mark with the classiness. I think of this movie like drinking a Corona versus drinking, a scotch or something like that. That's maybe why I would say, like, I would agree with you. It could be a top 3 for me, but I don't know if it's definitely better than Goldfinger or From Russia with Love.
Here's the thing. I agree with all of that. All of that. This movie isn't quality just because it's violent. I mean, I just, I enjoy that stuff, and it's certainly different from the previous movies, but that's kind of the point, right? This is where I say, all right, Barbara, you're totally right. I get it. There's always been this classy element to James Bond. If you're judging this on Bond movies, it cannot penetrate our
The Golden Two, yeah.
The Golden Two, Goldfinger and From Russia with Love. They've been dominating since the early days of this entire show. If you're judging this based on just an awesome action movie, it's the top. It is the top. If you're judging this on Bond stuff, even though every single Bond element is here, all of them. I mean, we even have an iguana with diamonds on it, instead of a cat.
Bond, James Bond, would you get me a medium dry vodka martini?
What a
shaken, not stirred.
They're all there. Everything. I mean, just look through the credits. If you're just looking through the credits, and you didn't know the story, you'd be like, oh, it's another Bond movie. That being said, though, if you're judging it based on a good movie, this is at the top. If you're judging it on Bond movies, I could see it at number 3. I put it in. My proposition is to put it at number 3. Reading through what I wrote, I said, small and personal stakes will pretty much always trump the big, stupid, repetitive stakes any day for me, because the big stakes are pretty much always the same. And like, oh, the world's going to explode or whatever, whatever. Dalton is... Everything I said last episode holds true here. Dalton, it's a crime that they never gave this guy a full Ian Fleming book to adapt. It's like I said, had he remade Dr. No, I'd have been fine with it. But, Dalton's fantastic. And this time we can see firsthand why he resigns from the service, and it makes total sense. On top of that, we have one of the better excuses for keeping Bond alive without sending 1,000 assassins to chase him all day. In fact, the only chase scenes we get are Bond running away from his own men for 5 seconds, and then Bond chasing the bad guy at the end, and one elongated chase scene. But overall, it is an 80s action movie. It was following the trend of an 80s action movie. I really don't think that brings it down. It certainly doesn't diminish it for me. And I'm going to punch myself in the face.
Do it.
Because
just someone watch you do it.
What it comes down to is my sweet if From Russia with Love was at the top, I would have no problem putting this at number 2 at all. I have
you don't
trouble
think it's better
putting
than
it
From Russia
above
with Love?
From Russia with Love because I just love From Russia with Love. It's so just classy and perfect, and the plot is it's just always doing. I'm making a snake pattern with my hands.
It's a good spy thriller, and not in the super spy like we talked about in the first episode, but it does it very, very well.
Yeah. So on one hand, I want to put it at the top. I love watching this movie. I could rewatch it over and over and over again. But when it comes to ranking Bond movies, I really have trouble. I mean, because I do think that if Timothy Dalton had done a couple more movies, I think people would always associate him with the best Bond. It is within his realm to be the best Bond. I think the movies he was in, specifically The Living Daylights, again, because that most of that movie, just you don't remember most of that movie. I think him just being in two movies and one of them is a movie that you barely remember. I think that's what brings him down. But he is the best actor when it comes to just acting chops. So far, he's the best Bond. Just so far as being a strong actor. Now, is he as cool as Connery? No. Is he as charming as Moore? No. Is he as physical as your butt buddy Lazenby? No. But when it comes to just expressing emotionality, Big Timmy Bond is the best so
Timmy
far.
Timmy is the actor. He is the actor thespian.
He's the thespian.
He's the thespian Bond.
I'm an actor.
It's unfortunate with a person of his caliber, and his co-stars are definitely not there.
Oh yeah,
and that's exactly the thing. I think if anything, if there's one thing that really sticks out for this movie is that one scene kind of, and it's not just the scene, but it's also the actresses, really kind of puts the movie down for me a little bit. And just kind of how films kind of plays into the not as classiness. You know, Bond going to a biker bar just kind of feels a little off-putting. You know, it's like, I'm going to a biker bar. And it's like, does Bond go to biker bars? Bond doesn't do biker bars, you know?
He does to me.
It just feels weird. There's just a lot of stuff that feels out of character and out of place.
That's
for
where
a Bond
I could sync
film.
up with you, dude. I could sync up with you so far as, again, I'm looking at my proposition right now, and I have motherfucking Goldfinger at the top still because of you assholes. And then I got
welcome.
my crown jewel from Russia with Love at number 2. And I'm thinking that License to Kill at number License to Kill is better than all the Roger Moore movies, clearly. I could see it at 3.
I'd feel very comfortable at 3. I feel very comfortable at 3. You know, maybe going into this, I thought, no, it shouldn't be that high. But, you know, after I watched it and thought about it, I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of really good story stuff in the movie. But the problem with, I think the general problem with the movie for me is, one, it's just the whole thing feels out of character for a Bond film, particularly. And 2, I feel like even though the things that really work, I do feel like they haven't quite sanded the edges. There's a lot of really, like, you know, you know how you went on a tirade about On Her Majesty's Secret Service, like they didn't quite nail it. They were trying to do the emotional Bond, but they didn't quite nail it. I feel like they got really close. They got really close in this one, to the point where it's like it kind of really works, because revenge stories are really easy to do. I think they're really easy to understand the motivations and how that all works. But I do feel like there was some sanding, some polishing, some of the techniques and all that stuff. It's not quite there. It's not quite perfect for me. And that's why I feel like it's a number 3. We never argued the validity of the Stinger going on to the truck stunt.
Yes. And I know you're going to be a big bitch about it.
Because you're like, it doesn't ruin the movie, Ryan. I'm like, it's a kind of silly moment in the movie.
It's so much fun, but I hate it because it's not realistic. Bond needs to only ever be super realistic, even though in this movie we have a camera that's a gun. We need everything to be uber realistic. And if a cool stunt happens, that's a ton of fun. I don't care. It's stupid and I hate it. That's you, McCurdy. You wet blanket motherfucker.
Kind of a silly stunt. It's like the stunt guys were like, yeah, we could do this. And they're like, all right, let's it.
Okay,
Let's put it in
wait.
the
Did they
movie.
do it for real, or did they?
They had to
prop
have.
it up?
There's no way.
That's
There's
real.
no other way. I mean, okay, when they do those stunts, there's, you watch it. He has to hit something for it to tip over. So obviously they have a ramp, and they probably balance the truck to stay on that one wheel. I mean, it's obviously a
Probably
practical
the same
stunt.
as Diamonds in Forever, just bigger.
Did they suspend it on a cable or something that
I don't
kept
know.
it standing
I
up?
think it's real.
Because I don't know how you balance something like
Yeah.
that. It's mind-boggling to me without
Practice.
something supporting it. But
Yeah.
but for me though, the stunt is yes outlandish, and it's the type of thing that again, if it ended up in a Daniel Craig movie, you might be going, what the hell is this? But for me, for the billionth time, it goes into the realm of it's fun. It's all worth it for me for that look on Timmy Bond's face as he's just like as he goes up to crush their car. It's awesome. If Bond just went up, that'd be one thing, but then added to that is when he comes back down and he
Smashes down
crushes
on
their
the thing.
car.
Yeah.
And
You're right.
then Bouvier flies over and dusts the guys. There's all this fun
There's a bunch
stuff
going on. It's
in
not
that
just
scene
one
that
thing,
it's just enjoyable.
I also say that, like, we talked about the beginning of the movie with the plane and them catching the plane and all that stuff. As I watched this movie, I cannot not help but think Christopher Nolan watched this a lot.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah, for
dude.
sure.
I just rewatched The Dark Knight Rises, and they do the exact same.
It's the
Let's
exact
go
same,
fishing thing.
almost
where
the exact
they,
same stunt.
What's the next part of your plan? To crush this plane with no survivors.
Yeah.
Like that's.
Yeah.
By the way, isn't Bane supposed to be Sean Connery? Yes, rise up, people of Gotham.
Yes, I was wondering what would break first.
Yes.
There's not the same truck flip, but like I can't help but think he was somewhat influenced by the truck tip and how they flip the truck in The Dark Knight.
Armored security vehicle driving off the road into the water was
And that too, that's also in The Dark
Yes.
Knight.
We don't need to reiterate what we've pointed out in the past, specifically with Secret Service, but when it comes to Nolan and Bond, he'll
You can
cast
tell he's a fan.
people
He
who are in
totally
Bond
is a fan.
movies. He's a big fan. When it comes to the stunt though with the truck, I can believe the truck stunt more than I believe the fucking skiing stunt. I think even as a kid, it bothered me. Speaking of Batman,
when he harpoons the airplane and then
speaking of Batman, he's
Yeah.
under the water and all these guys are grabbing at him, and then he harpoons it. And Batman does that, right? When he hits the monorail and he shoots off. Like, God, there's so much Bond in Nolan movies. But so he's water skiing behind the boat, and then he pulls off to the right and
somehow
then
gets
catches
enough
up
momentum
with
to
the
come.
plane and grabs
Well,
it. It's just that's not how skiing works. I guess that's fine. I mean, as a lifelong skier, it's hard for me to believe that moment. The tanker, I'm all for, but this when he does the skiing thing, I'm like, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. But
as you guys know, I came in really liking it, and I still really like it, obviously. But what you said a few minutes ago, McCurdy, about it maybe not being a Bond film,
Yeah.
makes sense to kind of knock it down a couple notches from one, because I really enjoyed the movie. I enjoyed the grittiness. I thought the special effects and the stunts and everything, but it did miss the Bondness of a lot of the other movies. I don't know how exactly you would weave Bondness into this plot, minus like just MI6 like somehow being okay with him going AWOL or supporting him.
I think had this movie been more of get rid of keep Robert Davey, right? Get rid of the Colombia drug cartel stuff. Swap it out for Russians. I think it would have fit better within a Bond film.
Where I disagree with you there is that not every Bond
doesn't
movie
always
has to
have
be
to be
the
Russia.
exact same thing
Have
the time.
fair enough. It doesn't have to be
All
the Russians,
time.
but swap it out with something that's a little more in Bond's, range. Like, we're not dealing with drug cartels. Maybe we're dealing with the Chinese. Maybe we're dealing
like if
with
somehow Sanchez was a threat to the UK.
something more to do with the Cold War.
Plug it into Britain somehow. is what you're saying.
It could be, yeah.
Plug it into the best interests of Her Majesty. The trouble is that the whole idea is that Bond goes rogue.
Sure.
Which
that's
is
great.
a cool idea.
Yeah, that's what's so
you
cool
could still
about
do
this
that
movie.
story with any other. I think if it wasn't a drug or operation or something, I really do feel like you could still pull that story, that revenge story of
But the drugs are
somebody doing
secondary. The
something
drugs mean
lighter.
nothing. The drugs mean nothing. They're secondary.
No, it does mean something because that's definitely playing to that 80s action film, and it definitely sets the tone of like the rest of the movie.
But the focus is Sanchez, not the drugs. Live and Let
No,
Die.
I know, but
Live and Let
Sanchez is a
Die, you're
drug
going, why is
dealer.
Bond dealing with drugs? What does Bond have to do with drugs? With this, the drugs are secondary to the man. The target is the man. The guy could have been smuggling
Charlie, I get that,
light bulbs
but
or something.
I get that it's
And
the man,
you know,
but I'm saying
I gotta
what
destroy
I'm
all
saying,
these light bulbs, these illegal light bulbs. They're causing little kids to have
God damn it,
epileptic
Charlie.
seizures. It's a big problem. Secondary to the fact that
all I'm saying,
Sanchez
Charlie,
is
all I'm
this
saying is
guy
if
that
you
has to
swap
die.
out a drug cartel guy with something like either it's the Chinese, a guy in China that takes revenge on a CIA agent, Felix, it's a guy in Cuba, something that maybe has more to do with the politics of the Cold War rather than it being. Well, that's kind of a separate issue, not the Cold War, but drug cartels is a separate issue from
McCurdy,
what Bond does.
Would Bond
so that's what I'm saying is if you
would Bond still be
adjust that-
motivated to fight back to go AWOL? Would Bond have
you
gone
would still
AWOL?
keep that. I'm not saying you would get rid of that. I would totally agree. You would still keep that. I'm just saying if you change the
There must be a
backdrop,
way to wrap it in.
it could have been played even more into like it's still a Cold War story, but maybe there's complications, and that's why the UK doesn't want to get involved. They're like, there's complications here. We don't want to get involved, even though it still has to do with the Cold War and spies and that kind of thing.
Because for me, you'd think like after this, MI6 would be like, okay, we get like you were killing a drug kingpin or whatever, but you can't just go doing that. We have to fire you, and we have to fire Moneypenny and Q for supporting you. Like you went
exactly
AWOL.
to that point. Like, and this is where I will agree with both of you. There is no. We get a scene at the end where he talks to Felix and they plan a fishing trip, but we don't get any resolution with M.
Yeah.
We never get we never see Bond put on trial for murdering all these people.
That's kind of a movie. The movie's over, guys. Like they killed the bad guy thing.
Yes. But
There's
following
not a-
the
but I
logic
agree,
of the
there's not a
movie,
wrap out.
why doesn't M show up at that party at the end? If everybody's at that party, why is M not there? Remember, M was in The Living Daylights at the end. There was no reconciliation with M.
Just M being like, we found a way to make it okay.
I do think the end of this movie is not
The Queen's
one
all
of
right
the
with it.
better endings in the Bond franchise because instead of the ending being like they destroyed the bad guy's ship and now Bond's in a raft with some beautiful woman or that trope that Roger Moore always used where, what's Bond doing? And he's sleeping with the other woman and all that stuff. And there's a bunch of innuendo and all that stuff. Instead, it's a party scene and we're wrapping up this plot about Bond, which girl is he going to choose?
It's at Sanchez's house.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, exactly. It's very strange. It's a very strange ending to a movie like this. And it could have worked better had it ended with him with Felix or something like that would have been, I think, more impactful.
Him going to the hospital and visiting his buddy and saying, hey, dude, I got him. And Felix is like, we have that emotional moment. Instead, he's like, hey, we're going to go fishing.
Yeah. What if the ending was Bond having words or maybe no words with Felix Leiter, like just a moment of your wife has been avenged and they smile at each other or something, maybe even something that harkens back to their first meeting in Dr. No. And as he's leaving the hospital, him and maybe Bill Tanner or somebody, they stop him and Bond looks at him and says, am I under arrest? And M says, we'll talk about it back in London. And then as he exits the hospital to signal to Bond fans around the world that Bond is back, that we're getting the traditional Bond back. He pulls up in the Aston Martin DB5 and the window comes down and we don't know who's in the car. And sure enough, it's Pam, and Bond gets in the car and drives off into the sunset. What an ending that would have been, instead of Bond jumping into the pool and dealing with some soap opera garbage of I'm in love with him. No, I'm in love with him. And that would have been perfect. It would have made, you would have got it. You'd been like, great.
Bond has been reinstated.
Yeah.
We want to know that things have gone back to normal, that Bond is being received as a hero for taking, in the same way that in A View to a Kill, it was the Russians who wanted to give Bond the medal. With this, you would think that him taking down Pablo Escobar would the president of the United States would probably want to celebrate that and all that. Not that we needed to see those things. My point being that instead we have a party at Pablo Escobar's house.
And it feels very off.
Well, yeah. I mean, Lupe ends up with a corrupt president. I do appreciate the, who doesn't love the moment where he jumps into the pool and then pulls her in? You have a little romantic moment, but there's no overall resolution so far as Bond is re-entering his career. I love these personal stories with Bond where we can just, forget all the normal stuff. Again, that's why I love The Man with the Golden Gun. Forget Bond's career and let's focus on the personal. Here we have the personal, but we do need to be reinstated into his career as he goes back to work, and we don't have that.
I do wonder if that was going to be something had Dalton continued, because again, there's a huge gap between this movie and the next film. There's
6
a very
years.
long gap. We will talk about that, but compared to what we've previously seen. But I do wonder, had they were like, next 2 years we're going to have the next Bond movie. Had maybe they started the next movie off as Bond's still a rogue agent and kind of shifted the series into a different aspect, because at that time, I don't know if spy movies were the thing. And obviously we'll get into the next film. That could have been a thing.
That's awesome.
That could have been a thing. And now it's now the franchise has changed where he's a rogue agent.
Imagine the sacrifice. This sacrifice is that for his buddy Felix, he was willing to give up his entire career.
And they could always have said, they could have gone that trajectory, and then they said, oh, well, this next movie at the end of it, he gets reinstated or whatever, That could have been the thing.
You have to re-earn your stripes to get back in. We're going to send you on this crazy mission.
Yeah, there's a lot that could have been done there, and because we're entering this with this movie, we're entering the territory of, we ran out of books, so we can do whatever we want. With this character, we can do whatever we want. And that's why I applaud this movie for doing something different, as opposed to let's come up with another The Spy Who Loved Me style plot of, a bad guy has some nukes and wants to destroy the world. Oh my God, we've been there. We've done that. Let's do something different. And that's why I think this movie's great. That coupled with the personal quality to it, I love the and the violence. There's so much to appreciate in this movie. But it does have those weird, again, going back to my ranking, I can't poke any holes in From Russia with Love. Except for Red Grant selling out. I can poke a lot of holes in Goldfinger, and you guys for making me put that at the top. But From Russia with Love is just perfect. I mean, even the one thing you pointed out, McCurdy, way back was, well, the gypsy scene doesn't need to be in there. But there is value to that scene. So overall, I can't poke any holes in From Russia with Love. And that's where, as much as I love this as an action movie, I can't, pulling out my favorite phrase, outclass, I just can't put it above From Russia with Love. I can't do it. I want to, because this movie's so great, but I can't. Nikolai, I'm sorry. This is your number one. I'm sorry, but I just can't put it above From Russia with Love. I can't do it.
No.
That's fine with me.
And I go home and I'm like, I think the personal story works really well. I think it's, as long as it's in the pantheon of the Bond films, it's not the all be all film, but it's a well told action revenge plot story. It just so happens to be James Bond, and that's what feels weird about it, but also good.
Yeah. But at the same time, that is why this movie's so enjoyable, because it is it does pull away from the norm. That's why I appreciate it. I will always appreciate movies with smaller, more personal stakes.
When Bond keeps it real.
Yes, because they're interesting. They are interesting because most of these movies, as like Bond formula-wise, this movie pulls away from the Bond formula beautifully. As much as it makes it a different movie entirely, I dig that. I like it. So anyway, so let's just, we all agree, let's lock it in at number 3. Goldfinger still at number 1 from Russia with Love. Number 2, Welcome, License to Kill. Timothy Dalton really hitting high marks compared to The Living Daylights. Anyway, The Spy Who Loved Me, The Man with the Golden Gun, Dr. No, A View to a Kill, For Your Eyes Only, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Thunderball, Octopussy, The Living Daylights, Live and Let Die, Moonraker, Diamonds Are Forever, You Only Live Twice. That's 16, fellas.
Can't believe we're here.
How many more?
We have hit modernity.
Like 9 more?
But we have finished an era. Like it's weird because it takes forever to get through more. Because more is like 2 eras. Because you're going through more the films trying to do whatever's cool in the 70s. And then John Glen enters the fold. And then it's John Glen and let's remake these movies. And then we get to Dalton. So it just feels like it takes forever just to get to this point. But I feel like once you get to Pierce and Craig, it feels more like smooth sailing.
We're going to enter the era of movies I've seen. Granted, not since I was a kid. But
we're not going to have gut reaction. Well, we'll still have gut reaction Nans, but we won't have first time gut reaction Nans.
No,
it'll be first time in 20 years.
It's like I haven't watched this in a while. This is, again, how I feel about this one and all this.
Yeah, and then meanwhile, I'm like, I watched GoldenEye yesterday.
It's the best movie.
It's great.
So good.
Foreshadowing.
So,